Hi there guys, my name is Alex Grigg and I have made a little tutorial on how I animate in Photoshop. Um, this is a slight update on my tutorial from a couple of years ago that a lot of people seem to enjoy or hate or get something out of or think I'm crazy for animating in Photoshop, but I still do it and I still love it, and yeah, I'm hoping to well, share some of the things I've learned over the last couple of years and with the latest versions of the software. So hopefully um, I can I can convey some of that stuff to you. I've been working in a lot of different projects. This is something that I did for Cartoon Network, and this was all done in Photoshop animation. You can see here this is animated at 4K and video layers and normal layers and things like that. And they're all things that I'll go over in the tutorial. And these are some scenes from my short film, Phantom Limb. Once again, all animated in Photoshop, frame by frame. This frame. I should say straight up, this isn't for people who are new to Photoshop. If you're new to Photoshop, there's probably better software packages out there for you. This is really a tutorial aimed at people who like using Photoshop to create images and want to be able to make them move. This is one of the main reasons I like using Photoshop for animating is because there's no gap between the design and the animation process. They're all one single sort of action, really. If I can draw it, if I can design it, if I can make it look good, I can make it move as well, because it just means doing it twice or three times or whatever. And before we get too far along, I want to introduce you to Ari Gibson. I don't know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I worked on a short film with Ari and the team in um, in Australia on a film called The Cat Piano, and a lot of the stuff that I learnt originally was from Ari and the crew on The Cat Piano. So credit where credit's due. Go check out his work, mechanicalapple.com. And I know that they've got some sweet work coming out really soon. So yeah, get on top of that because they're sweet dudes and they're super good at what they do. Just to give you a bit of a heads up what's going to happen in the tutorial, I will be starting with the sort of fundamental sort of steps in the animation process that I use, and then moving on to a bit deeper workflow. And then I'll be moving on to a few extra tricks and tips to, I don't know, to give you a bit of a head start so you don't have to spend as much time figuring it out as I did. Okay, I hope it helps. I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, thanks. Hey guys, so I've got Photoshop open at the moment. This is Photoshop Creative Cloud. You'll need at least Photoshop CS3 extended, I think, and then extended all the way through up to CS6. And then in Creative Cloud, you just get the full package, which is nice. There'll be a few terminology issues before CS6, so hopefully my previous tutorial will cover a lot of that stuff, and this one will be dealing in the new terminology. Okay, so first up, I really just want to get you to dive in, see how all the bits of it work in context, and then later on we'll make a more in-depth tutorial. So first things first, there's kind of three main, I'll call them types, three main methodologies that I use in Photoshop animation. So one would be layer animation, and that's very similar to my last tutorial, but I've got a bunch of new stuff that I need to do because it's a later version. Video layers is something that I always avoided, but it's actually a lot faster for certain kinds of animation and cleanup and color. So I use that a lot these days, and especially in combination, these two. And then the third type, which I don't use that much, but I know everyone likes it, and it's really designed for this sort of thing. Video groups. Just a much more organized way of keeping your layers and stuff. So I'm going to go through and get you guys set up with one of each of these so you can see it, and then later on we'll talk about workflow stuff, making you work faster and more efficiently. So we'll go, firstly we'll start with layer animation. We'll make a new file. You know, we don't need to work in these TV presets, but I tend to find that it's good to do. So the first step for any animation, despite the one of the three techniques I'm going to show you, is to go down to timeline and open up the timeline window, and then say create video timeline. Now this will give you a 5-second clip of nothing at the moment, but it'll mean that you can scrub through this playhead anywhere in the thing, and this acts almost like a Premiere or After Effects layer now. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is enable our timeline shortcut keys. So if we click that, you get our little arrow tick next to it. And what your enable timeline shortcut keys are going to let you do is use the new hotkeys that CS6 and above have brought in to navigate your timeline. So if you press right now, you'll go forward in time. If you press left, you go back in time. If you press up, you go to the start of the time of the layer, and if you press down, you go to the end of the time of the layer. There's a slight bug where if you create a new layer that starts at time 0, these hotkeys won't work for you straight away. So you need to create a layer anywhere else, and then it'll work for you fine. Maybe that'll get updated by the time you watch this anyway. Okay, so, and then the first thing I always do when I start a new file is set the frame rate. At the moment, I'll make it 24 frames per second because it's a really convenient frame rate to animate to. It's what the old masters used to animate to, and I don't think that's particularly important, except that it's great for dividing each second into halves and quarters and things like that. So it's quite an easy number to divide. And it's also the standard frame rate for film. The other thing that won't be set up when you come in is that it'll have a little thumbnail for each layer. And I find that gets a little bit cumbersome quite quickly. So I usually say panel options and I go down to no thumbnail. Okay, so we've got our little timeline here. We've got the play controls here. We can play, go to next frame, previous frame. You can turn sound on and off. Photoshop isn't so great for sound still. You can't scrub sound as far as I know. I could be wrong. I've only just started using Creative Cloud, so maybe they fix that, but I don't think they have. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is create a new layer, and that'll create a layer starting from wherever your playhead is. And that'll become important later, but at the moment, we'll just drag it back to 0. And we'll make a little drawing for our first keyframe. So I'm going to make an eyeball because human beings like eyeballs better than bouncing balls. So make it a little bit reptilian. Okay. So something you'll see as like an advantage over Flash, not so much TV Paint, but an advantage over Flash is the drawing tools are obviously a lot more friendly in Photoshop, and that's the real reason that I like to use it. Because of that. I mean, I love Flash, but I really don't like drawing in Flash. And I know there's going to be people out there yelling at their computer screens when I say that. All right, so I'll just have a basic eyeball. It's a creepy eyeball. All right, and now I'm like, okay, so I want to make the next keyframe. There's a little trick that I use all the time. I press V And then if you press 3, it'll make your opacity 30%. Or if you press V and 6, it'll make your opacity 60%. So I usually use 30. That's a nice opacity. Then I'll just create a new layer. And then I'll say, okay, I want a closed eyelid. Okay, so we got this eyelid is closed. Okay, so now you can see we've got this closed eyelid. That's not the right place. Okay, we've got the closed eyelid. And I probably want one in between for when it opens. So I found that eyes generally have a little bit of ease when they're opening up. They can sometimes have an overblink where they open up wider, and they can sometimes have like a slow open, but they usually open slower than they close. You can have a lot of fun with blinks. I'm sure there's people yelling at the computer screen now too. I'm sorry if I've said something wrong about blinks. I'm actually going to make the pupil a little bit bigger for this frame, just because I think he's kind of reptilian, and I think he might open his eye a little bit. His pupil might dilate a little bit when he closes his eye, because it gets dark in there. Okay, I might put these little details back around the eye. See, this is just like a rough pass. Okay, so I've got these 3 frames. I'm going to set their opacity back to 100, and a quick way to do that is press V and then 0, then V and then 0. You can actually do it for all of the frames at the same time as well, so V30, V3 and then V0. You may find that you press 0 and it makes it 0%. That's something that's been introduced in CS6, and it's a bit finicky sometimes. Okay, so we've got this, and I'm like, what do I do with it now? Obviously, it's not what I want. So I'm gonna shorten this. So at the moment 5 seconds is too long. I mean, a blink is only going to be like a second worth of animation in there that's worth looking at. So I'll shorten everything, and that's going to shorten everything down here. And you can also shorten the amount that you play by stretching these in and out points here. Okay, so let's say this is the open frame, so we're going to keep that open for ages. We have the closed key here, and then we have the halfway point that eases out into the open. That's a little bit long at the moment. And you'll find that if you zoom in and out, it'll change the threshold for where you can, how small you can make these and where they snap to. It's a little bit creepy, but I think that generally my idea for that dilating pupil is a little bit off at the moment, so I'm gonna reduce it a little bit. And you know, normally I wouldn't, I don't know, share me messing around like this, but sometimes it's good to see in tutorials when you're not happy with something and see how to fix it. So, all right, so yeah, now we've got a blinking eye, which you know, it's gonna blow people's socks off. Okay, the next step, you know, you want to send it to all your friends. You can go File, Export, Render Video. You can use a H.264 render. I tend to use, if I'm just doing a quick test, I'll do a H.264. If I'm doing a high quality, if I'm doing something high quality, I will typically make a Photoshop image sequence, and then I'll export it as a PNG sequence. And this gives you a whole bunch of files that will spit out and it'll be really useful in After Effects. So at the moment, we're going to call it Blink 01, and I always put like a little underscore there, just so that these guys don't get mixed up. Create a new subfolder. Let's make this in somewhere clever. 13. put it in here, blink, make a new subfolder, and we will render. And then we get this little thing. I just keep it on normal. Then we'll export the sequence. And unless you're using After Effects, this isn't going to be super useful. But yeah, I mean, everything I do usually goes through a pass of After Effects at the end anyway. So, and it generally has better encoding at the end than Photoshop. And the other thing you can do, and I know lots of people want to do this, so I'm going to get into it first, is creating a GIF. So you just say, I always use Control Alt Shift S and to say save for web, and then you downsize it to maybe 100. That's too small. 400. Okay, it's a bit better. We want looping forever. I don't know why once is default. I don't know who would ever want once, but okay. Now we have that, and we can save that into the folder that we want. Oh, but yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so we've got that. That's the first method. The next method I'm going to show you is video layers. So we'll make a new one. We'll create a new video timeline. All the same as before. Set timeline frame rate. We have to do this again. Let's make it. I'm going to make it 12 frames. That's as though. Actually, I'll make it 24 for this and 12 for the next one. So 24 for this one. And now we're going to make a new kind of layer. And this is a technique that I always avoided until I actually had to animate a lot of stuff for Phantom Limb. So you go to Layers, Video Layers, New Blank Video Layer, and that'll create this new video layer. It's got this like a little tiny icon. It's different, and that essentially means like this is a timeline, and every time you shift a frame, it's going to be a new image. So it's like a whole bunch of frames all rammed into one layer. It took me a long time to get into this method because it's a little bit of a jump into the darkness. Because unlike Flash, you can't see the lines between all these keyframes. You can't see little images of what they might be. You don't know if there's going to be drawings on them. So you have to be quite organized with how you deal with it. This is particularly good for drawing, for doing straight ahead animation, effects animation. And the other thing that's really good for is cleanup and color, because it just condenses everything to one layer, and it's quite quick then to use. Okay, so we've got our new layer, and this is where shortcuts, the timeline hotkeys come in really handy. So left and right can toggle between frames, forward and back, much like the comma and full stop in Flash. I'm going to get my brush, and I'm going to show you, this is kind of like the style that's really, well, not the style, but this is like a version that's quite good for animating this way. So I've got a little dot. So something's quite simple is what I'm trying to say. Animating quite simple stuff is good for this one. So I've got this little dot, and this time around we're going to use onion skins, enable onion skins. So what onion skins do is show you before and after as like a little overlay. Typically, I set that to a hotkey, Control Y, and I'll do that later on, but just for speed, we're going to ignore that. So now all I'm doing is I'm just drawing straight ahead. So I'll say, okay, that's the first frame, this is the second frame, this is the third frame, and each time I'm just pressing right to move through these little things. So I've got my little dot, he's sort of chilling out, and then I'm going to make him go whoop, quite far, and then slow down. So this is like a really, really good way to experiment with timing, spacing, without having a to worry about anatomy and things like that. So if you're looking for a just a way to play with animation, this is a really, really good sort of way to work. And if you're thinking maybe I want to see more than one frame, you can go to onion skin settings. Before and after, I'll make it 2 before, 2 after. You can also change from multiply to these different things, and you'll find that different drawings will be more useful. Multiply is pretty solid for black on white drawings though. Okay, so you can see I can toggle through as I'm flipping through the flip book. Okay. Maybe want that. I don't know how this is going to look. That's why it's kind of fun to do things this way. If you've seen the film I worked on, Phantom Limb, all of the gooey effects were done this way. And I think goo's kind of been a bit, it's been used a lot in the last couple of years. So if you're wondering how they're doing it, it's probably similar to the straight ahead method. All right, so I'm going to turn off onion skin settings. Whoop, I'm going to turn off onion skin. And now I'm just going to play. Okay, so that's quite a like an energetic little animation. And of course, yeah, of course you can make the feeling of your animation however you want, but that's kind of how it's working. Video layers, it takes a while to get your head around things. As far as, well, it took me a while to get my head around things. So there's lots of little things that you're like, okay, well, I kind of want to put a frame in between here, but I can't really see between these two things. All you need to do is go to Layer, Video Layers, and then maybe you want to insert a blank frame, and that's going to push all of these frames back and put a blank frame in here. And that probably seems kind of crazy because you can't see what's between, you can't really sort of gauge. It's not the most intuitive way of working, but later on I'll show you all the hotkeys I use for that, and it becomes a little bit more intuitive. It just becomes sort of muscle memory, like any software package does after a while. So there's just a bit of barrier for entry in that one. Okay, so there's that, which is a pretty fun way to practice, I think. Cool. Now the third method is one that I don't use very much. And it's not because it's bad, I just haven't needed to, because both those methods kind of work well together. And this method is kind of it's kind of an amalgamation of the two, but I haven't found a great way to work it into the way my brain works. So, okay, so as always, set your timeline frame rate. I'm going to make it 12 frames per second, which is like animating on 2s, and later on we can change it. But at the moment, we'll make it 12 frames per second. And it just makes it a little bit lighter on the machine as you're working as well. Okay, so this is that inconvenient thing where it wants to make a really long thing. Okay. So once again, let's make I don't know, what should we do? I haven't thought about this one. Okay, we got this little guy who looks really pathetic. The little fella. All right, now we're gonna make another layer. Yeah, let's make another layer. That's kind of, see how it makes it really long? Later on I'll show you some actions to make this quicker, but this is a way to make all of your layers the same length so you don't have to keep shortening them. You just duplicate it, select all with Control A, delete with delete, Control D to deselect, and now you've got a layer that's the same thing. Usually I have to set that to 30, and later on I'll show you the action that you need to make that just a one button push. All right, so we'll make another keyframe. Keep my brush the same. Okay, usually I would try to be a little bit more structural in how I draw, because this guy's getting all wonky, but I'm being kind of self-conscious at the moment because you're watching me. Alright, so we've got these two keyframes. that guy and that guy. Man, these were eyebrows. Whoop. Okay. Whoop. There we go. Look at him. He's super sad. All right. Now we're like, okay, so we want it to be that long. We want it to hold in that one that long. That's kind of cool. So that's the same way as it was working before. I might delete that. Something that I use a lot, which I didn't mention earlier, but it's super useful. And I didn't mention it because it's become just sort of how I work in Photoshop now, and I don't think about it. By default, auto select, when you press V, auto select is off. If you turn that on, that'll just mean that every time you're over the frame, you can just click on the pixel that's in the frame, and that'll select your layer. And that just means you won't be having to wrestle with these all the time, which honestly is a nightmare. So I would use the auto select option as you can. And you see what I just did there? I accidentally clicked that one, and that's a pain. That's the one thing that's annoying. When you might just delete his ears because they. I like his ears though. Shit. Okay. He can have ears. All right. Let's meet this guy. He's looking up, all sad. All right. What you can do now is just drag this down onto the same layer. And you can see over here it's called Video Group 1. And it's called Video Group 1 over here as well. So it's kind of a weird beast now. So it's got really great things. Like if you shorten this, it's going to push all this back. And it's going to save that timing, which is really nice. But now if I want to create an in-between, it's kind of a bit weird. So if I just create another frame, another layer here, it creates a 5-second gap, and it's like, you've messed up all my timing, and you're gonna pull it back, and yeah, that's not so great. So I'll delete that because that's kind of boring. All right, so I'll just duplicate this guy. Duplicate this by dragging onto new, and I'll shorten this, and I'll shorten this one. So now it's the same timing. I'm sure someone smart can think of an action that does this automatically, but I haven't really given it enough thought, I don't think. So now I just deleted that guy, and I'll turn on my onion skinning. Woo! Okay. And I will do an in-between. Okay, let's see. I'll try to keep the same line rate. If you're just new to animation, this is where all the fun happens. All the juicy stuff happens in the in-betweening, the sort of breakdowns. If you're not new to animation, you'll probably think I'm crazy. Or maybe you agree. I don't know. I love this bit. So you can see it's kind of a bit confusing to draw like this sometimes. So what I would normally do is sort of do this very structurally, and I'd have these things, and I'd make sure these bits are right, and then I would turn off onion skinning. Ooh, turn off onion skinning. See, like that really needs to be figured out. And then I would flick back between them. And flicking, I find, is a much better way to keep physicality to the drawings rather than kind of like blending drawings together. But I mean, I'm not going to try to tell you how to draw because you are all probably 100 times better than me. Alright. Alright. Turn this back on. I've made these insane eyes, which maybe don't work in real life. Alright, so I said that the fun in this can be kind of changing in between. At the moment, it's a very vanilla in between because it's kind of halfway between the two. But you know, this is an animation class; it's a Photoshop class. Okay, so at the moment it's only one frame, so it's probably going to be too fast. You know, he's doing his thing. Yeah, and then you can obviously, I don't know, I would probably put a little antic here and then a little ease out here, a little moving hold, bit of overlap in the hair. Okay, but that's basically it. That's all you need to know is like this is just like layers animation, but it's a little bit more organized. The reason I don't use it so much is that all of my actions don't work with this because, as I said, when you duplicate this, it changes all your timing, which is it's not something I've been able to get my head around just yet. It's not something I've needed to solve, but it might be something you're into, and I get asked about it a lot. So, okay, so that's the three main methods. And now I'm going to go on and try to show some workflow tips for all of these methods to make them actually workable within a scene. Okay, so this is the part of the tutorial that I start going into deeper methods. And these are just about making Photoshop a usable production tool. A lot of what I've shown you so far is like practical and anyone can make stuff quickly with it. But if you're doing it all day, every day, you really want to be finding ways to make things quicker and quicker and quicker and just more intuitive, so it's getting less in the way of your creative process, I think. So what I've got here is a file, and it looks like chaos, but it's been built up over maybe like 4 or 5 days. So it makes sense as you build it. You can see down here I've got a frame rate of 25 frames per second, and I'm using a combination of the methods. So I've got the layer method here, and I've decided to use the layer method for this guy because the style of the film I made that the shot was from, I was using quite a limited style of animation for a lot of the character stuff. So here he's got like long holds, he's got a couple of little variations here where he blinks. You're noticing there's no line boil either. So because there's not a lot of animation in it, I decided to use the layer method. For the hand, however, for the limb, it's moving most of the time. It's quite a smooth movement, and it's got this this straight ahead goo animation as well, this sort of ghostly stuff coming off it. I did do this again in comp where it sort of has a bit of movement, so it's flying around. But that's a story for another day. So for this stuff, I used the video layer. These two video layers are the main ones. And up here, these little ones here, when I switched from 12 frames per second to 12.5 frames per second to 12.5 frames per second, from 12.5 frames per second to 25 frames per second, I had to add some ones in there. And that's the reason I switched, was to add some ones for this, have some impact from this break, so you could feel it a bit more. I mean, I would have ideally liked to animate a lot more ones, but that's life sometimes. So you can see that I've got these two methods that are working together for different parts of the animation where I feel like it's the right thing to be doing. And also something that is worth thinking about is that if I'm done with this scene and I'm not working on it anymore, I'll quite often use this third method, consolidating everything down into one layer, which can be can make it easier to organize. So here, this doesn't do anything at the moment, so I'm going to delete that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is show you some ways to speed up working using the 3 different methodologies. Okay, so there's a couple of quick things we can do to work up all to help with all of the different methods. So the first thing is I'll set my hotkey for enabling onion skinning to Control Y. You can use whatever you like for that one. But I like Control Y because it's a hotkey at the moment that does something. It puts things into CMYK proofing, which sometimes messes up me when I'm working. So I'm gonna kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So it's an application. No, it's in panel menus. panel menus down to timeline video, then down to enabling skinning, and it's already on Control Y. So that's what we want. I'll say accept. Okay. And the other thing that I use a lot of is toggling the move tool onto auto select and layer. I do it a lot, so if you haven't set that up already, put that in, because that'll mean that you can just click on whichever pixel you want to start editing, and it'll mean you don't have to dig through your layers in the timeline already here as well. So a big part of animating in Photoshop is learning to get around the limitations of the program and sort of harnessing the strengths for your own sort of gain. What I always do is set up some actions, and this is going to seem really boring and a lot of hard work. Honestly, it only takes about 5 minutes once you understand what it is, and you do it once and you never have to do it again unless you move on to a different machine. And you know, I would just give you files to download, but I feel like if you understand this process, you'll be able to make sweet new actions and share them with people and share them with me and stuff. So hopefully this isn't too boring. Okay, so the first set I'm going to show you is for layer animation, and this is quite similar to my last tutorial. So if you've got this under your belt, maybe you can move on. But so for layer method, what I want to do is I want to be able to create a new frame. I want to be able to say, well, I kind of want to duplicate this. I want to set the opacity down. I want to delete this guy, and now I want to be able to draw over it so that I can have like an in-between, which is a lot of work just to create a new frame. In Flash and TV Paint, there's a singular button for that. So we can do something similar here. So this is the layout of the action that we're going to create. And if you haven't created actions before, I wouldn't be too afraid of them. I was kind of afraid when I first started. It just seemed like an extra hoop to jump through, but once you start using them, you'll love them. So bring up your action, see if we can get everything into frame. Okay, so bring up your action panel, and I've made a little folder here for animation toot. And I am going to say new action, I'm going to say new frame. And even when you're not animating, you can actually use this action a fair bit. So I'm going to stop that. I'm going to stop that for a second because it's selecting a document. All right, now I'm in the right document. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we're recording, and then we press V and then 3, and that'll set our opacity to 30. Then we'll duplicate our layer by dragging onto the new layer thing here. Then we'll say Control A to select all. Press delete to delete everything. Press Control D to deselect everything, and then press V and then 0 to set your opacity back to 100. And then you can stop. And that's 1/3 of your actions made right there. This is new frame. And then the handy thing you can do is put this onto an action button. So I'm going to make this F2 because I use it all the time. So now when I press F2, it's going to make a new layer on top that's clean, and I can draw over it. So you can use this either for creating in-betweens. So you just go like that, now it's an in-between layer. Or you can use it for creating a cleanup layer on top of this guy. Let's get some nice big fat. At the moment I'm just pressing F a lot. F changes your framing, and then R changes your rotation. And I've got a kind of rough cleanup frame. Okay. Alright, so that is we're 1/3 of the way through. Thanks for sticking with me. All right. So the next thing we want to do is, well, let's do a cleanup frame so that we've got a frame to color. Because when I first started using Photoshop animation, I was a little bit concerned that you wouldn't be able to color the line work very easily. And honestly, it's if you've got kind of a not totally loose style of your final cleanup drawings, the coloring process is quite easy. So, okay, let's say we want to color this inside bit here. We need a layer below it. Now we've got a layer below it, and we want to select everything in it. And now if I just fill that, it's gonna have this gross anti-aliasing here. So what we need to do is start expanding that selection into that line, and then we fill it. Okay, so let's make another action, and we'll call it, we'll make a new action, call it expand fill, and say record. Okay, we won't start recording straight away because firstly we need to make our selection. And now we can start recording. So now we can say edit. No, sorry, we can say select. Let's bring up our other window so we can see. I'll just keep this open so that you don't get too lost. So I'll just keep this open so you don't get too lost in this process, so you can read it here. All right, because this one's a bit of a mouthful, but it's actually quite simple. All right, so we've selected that. We'll say record, and we'll say select, modify, expand, and I'll make it 2 pixels. Depending on the resolution you're working at, you might need to change that. And then what we want to do is press Alt, open square bracket, and that'll step to the layer below. And then we want to press Alt backspace to fill that selection with our foreground color, which is black. And then I want to press Alt, close square bracket to step back up the layer, and then Control D to deselect. And then stop. I'm going to call that, I'm going to change the number, the function key to F3. So now we have a sweet function button that can fill any closed shape, basically. And the last action I want to create for you is creating a new color layer, because you saw earlier that it was a bit of a rigmarole to create a color layer. And when we're coloring and cleaning up, we kind of want the least resistance possible. So I will create a new action. I'm going to call it new color layer. This is really similar to our new frame action, but it's just stepping back a layer. It's creating a layer below the other layers. All right. So let's turn off that old color layer. So we're recording on our new color layer. We'll duplicate it. Now we need to step back a layer with Alt open square bracket. Yep. And now we need to say Control A to select everything, delete to delete everything from that first layer, Control D, and then Alt close square bracket to step back up to this top layer, and press stop. and I'm going to give that the F4 button. Okay, so that's some sweet actions that'll save us some a bunch of time actually. So one big thing that's changed a lot since my first tutorial is that I use video layers a lot more now, and I use them a lot more for both animating and also for color and cleanup. And before I get too far into the video layer method, I need to just give you a little bit of a primer into what a video layer is, because when you start using it, it's a little bit of a black box sort of situation. You can't really look inside it like you can a Flash timeline or any other timeline that you typically use for animating. So I'll create a new blank video layer. I'll move it over here. You can see it's a lot like an After Effects timeline, it's a lot like a Premiere timeline, which is great for dealing with film, but not so great for dealing with animation. So you'll have to start visualizing it. Well, this is how I visualize it. It's kind of like a column, and inside it are these invisible lines that break up the frames. And there'll always be one frame. They'll always be broken up into one frame. You can't use things like in Flash where you can have one drawing held for 2 frames. You kind of have to duplicate each of those frames that you want to hold for. Okay. To really get the most out of using the video layer method, we need to set up some hotkeys so that creating a blank frame is one button, duplicating a frame is another button, deleting a frame, and new video layer are all hotkeys. So I'll go ahead and do this. It's actually probably set up already. So we want the application menu, and we want to go to layer, and then we go down to new blank video layer, insert blank frame, duplicate frame, and delete frame. I use Control B, Control Alt B, and Shift Control B to do these basic ones because I use them all the time. And when you first come in, they're probably not allocated to hotkeys that you'd already use. And you can use it all with your left hand, which is really important because your right hand's going to be drawing. The more difficult one to access is the Alt Shift Control B, and that's for creating a new blank video layer. That one is kind of hard to use with one hand, but you don't have to do it that often. So let's go back to our little eyeball over here, and I'll delete this color layer because we're going to start doing this in video layers now. Let's go to, nope, okay, let's go. Alright, and I'm going to create a new video layer. Control Alt Shift B. I know these sound like a mouthful, but after like a day of animating, you're going to be just on cruise control with them. You'll just be using them all the time. I'll put these guys into a group. I'll turn the opacity down. And this is typically how I work. At the moment, I use this for. I typically do my blocking with the layers, and then I do my actual animation with this method. So let's say we want to do a cleanup frame of this eye. I'm using the word cleanup pretty loosely in this tutorial, I'm going to say, but I know you don't want to see me sweating over lines too much while you want to learn some software. So, okay. All right, so we've got that frame. We got that frame, and we got that frame. So I'll do a cleanup frame in this one. And I'll do cleanup frame on this one. Let's get this little eye in. Okay, so we've got these kind of cleaned up frames. And now this is where there's a bit of a leap. I've turned off my blocked out drawings, and they're kind of timed out the way that I want them. But now we have to kind of take a backward step where we've got these blank frames for holds. So the first thing I'd do is duplicate this frame, because it's meant to be held for a bunch of frames. So we've got a hotkey for duplicating a frame. Do we remember what it is? Let's see. It's over here. So duplicating a frame is Control-Alt-B. So we go to the frame we want, press Control-Alt-B once, twice. Now we have to delete these blank frames by pressing Control-Shift-B twice. Now we've got this little hold. Okay. Alright. Now I want to put an in-between in. So what do I do? Alright, so I want to select and delete everything in this frame, so I'll press Control-A and then just delete it. And I'll press Control-Y now to turn on our onion skinning. Okay, we'll just draw this little in-between. Okay, we got a little in-between. Press Control-Y to turn off our onion skinning. Now we can just step through our frames with our left and right button. Okay. And let's just do one more in between. Blinks are a bit funny. It's not the frame I want to delete. You wouldn't normally have a lot of time between these two. Let's have a clench. Okay. It's really fast now because I don't have a hold at the start. So how do we do that? Alright, I'll select it all, Control-C to copy it. I'll make a layer, Control-V. Now this is the really quick way of making a giant hold. Okay, so we've used our video layer here. We've got our little couple of frames of animation. Let's say we want to make a color layer now. We'll make a new video layer by pressing Control-Alt-Shift-B. We'll move it up to the start of this as well. I'm going to call it color. Now we can use the same actions from before, so we press F3 to fill. Select that one, press F3 to fill, and make it yellow. Alright, so I'm going to fill this section here, so I'll do that. Pressing F3, F3, F3. Now we've got to fill our holes, so I'll press F4 to create a new color layer, select it, F3 to fill, select this one, F3 to fill, and voila. I know all this sounds like a real, I don't know, it's a long way of doing things sometimes. But once you get the hang of it, you'll just sort of ease into it, and you'll find ways that you prefer working as well. And I feel kind of like I need to explain a couple more things before I move on with video layers. Earlier, I've been saying from the start that we need to set our timeline frame rate as soon as we open our scene. And that has to do with one of the quirks of using timelines within Photoshop. When you create a video layer, or actually any layer, it inherits the frame rate of the scene that you create it with. So at the moment, I'm working at 12 frames per second. So this layer, this video layer, has these invisible folds in it 12 times for every second, which is great when we're working with 12 frames per second. But if I want to work at 12 frames per second and then later I want to switch to 24 frames per second, cool. It's a little bit of a pain. So I'll just quickly show you that. So if I say set timeline frame rate and I say 24, now when we skip through this layer holds each of these frames for 2 frames, which is great until you want to put 7.5 in between here. So if I rub this out now, it's rubbed out on the frame before as well. So you can see now you can't put one in there. So what you can do is you can cut this frame with Control X. Now if I create a new video layer above it at 24, this one's going to be at 24 frames per second, and I can say 7.5, and now we have, you know, if you want to add a couple of ones into a scene, this is what I do sometimes, and sometimes I copy everything just onto this layer, which I'm going to show you in action how to do that in the next tips and tricks section. But I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of this sort of, because you may come across it and be baffled about what's happening. And the real trouble is that if you see 12 and 24 is quite easy, but if you had started in 29.97, which is the standard, that becomes like far more difficult to figure out the differences in the time and the frame rates. The other thing that I want to show you just quickly is that if you're using video layers, and say I've got a layer above it and I've got this like little star, and I want to take this, I want to cut it, and I want to paste it into this video layer, just on this frame. So I might just switch back to 12 frames per second just for now. So we want to stick it on this frame, which is 6. I'll press Control V, and it creates a layer above it, which is like, that's a pain. And the reason that happens is because you've got something already in this frame. So if I was to go to frame, if I was to undo that, if I was to go to this empty frame where I've deleted the 7 and press Control V, it pastes it directly into your video layer. And if I did still want it on this layer, I can press Control V, I can move it where I want, and then press Control E to flatten it into this single frame. Yeah, that's just a little quirk. I thought I'd save you the time beating your head against the keyboard trying to figure that out. yeah, I guess anything I can do to remove friction from your life is going to help you, you know, get engaged in this stuff. So hopefully that helps. Okay, so those were the sort of building blocks of how I work, combining the layer method and the video layer method. Now I'm just going to run you through a few extra tips, tricks, things that might be updated in CS6 that I think are useful. And first thing I'm going to start with is just creating I'm going to create a quick loop of a texture that I've brought in. And I'm going to use the video group method to make this loop a little bit more quickly. So we've got our texture, and now I'm just going to duplicate this texture because it's quite big. I'm going to flip it horizontally, move it a bit, press enter, and I'll do the same again. I'll just duplicate this layer, and now I'm going to say flip again. Move it around. Okay. Now I'll just drag them all onto the same timeline down here. And now I've got a sort of a choppy texture. What I want to do now is make this into a video file so I can overlay it on top of my previous animation of the eye. So all you need to do is select your layers and duplicate them, and it's going to sequence them for you, which is a really nice little thing that doesn't happen if you use the regular layer method. So now we can quickly make a 3-second loop. Okay, so we've got this 3 seconds of video. Now I'm going to say export render video, and I'll make a Photoshop image sequence, a PNG sequence. I'm going to give it a name. Texture boil VO1. And now I'm going to create a new subfolder within our normal folder, and I'm going to call it texture boil. I'm going to say render. Okay, you can see progress now. It's a little bit slow because the texture I'm using is really, really big. Even though it's not rendering the whole texture, I think it has to load it into memory anyway, so I'll speed this up. Okay, that's done now. Alright, now if we go back to our eyeball, so we've got our eyeball animation, and I want to make a texture on top. So this is a brand new feature in CS6. It's I use it quite a bit. So if you go to video layers and you say new video layer from file, and now we can just say go to our texture boil, select our first image in the image sequence, and now image sequence is ticked, and say OK. So now it's overlaid on top and it plays back, which is great. I'm going to make this a multiply blending mode. I'm make the opacity. What if we make it overlay? Might be nicer. Yeah. That might be too light. I guess that's kind of nice. Alright, so now we have this little flickery texture over the top, which is always nice. We can do this in After Effects quite easily, but I wanted to use this as an example of building everything within Photoshop. The other thing I do quite a lot is to create colored line layers. So this is more of a Photoshop trick than a animation trick, but if you click on this checker box here, it does a thing called lock transparent pixels. So that'll mean when you paint over anything in that, it won't affect anything that's transparent. So essentially that means you can paint your line color after you've done it in black. So we'll do this for this line layer too. Okay, next frame. Okay. And one more frame. So this is how I get a lot of my more, I don't know, I use this technique a fair bit. It's quite time consuming, but you know, animation is typically pretty time consuming. So I am okay with it. Another thing that I use quite a bit is creating clipping masks and applying them to whole groups. This is something that came out in CS5. It's incredible. Not enough people know how to use it or know that it exists. So just say I had this and I actually wanted it on multiply, which means you've got this, it's very hard to mask it normally, but if you put everything into a group, all of your animation, all of your lines into a group, and say create clipping mask, you can actually now clip this to the entire group rather than clipping it to individual layers like it was in previous versions, which is really nice, and I use that a lot as well. Yeah. And the last thing I want to show you before I wrap up this tutorial, because it's pretty long, I know, it's kind of a lot to take in, is just learning to use actions that involve shifting through time. A lot of the stuff in animation is really repetitive and you can apply it to lots of frames at the same time. So the action I'll show you now is an example of one that involves skipping through time and also repeating an action that you may want to do a lot. The example I'm going to show you is how to condense all of your images and all of your layers into one video layer that's nice and clean and easy to use, whether that's for cleaning up, coloring, or animating. It can sometimes just simplify your life a little bit. Alright, so firstly, I'll make a new video layer with Control-Shift-B. I'll move it up so it starts at the right time. And then I'm going to change its color. I'm going to make it violet. No, that's, what about red? Okay, red. And I'm going to say all lines. Okay. Okay. Let's say we hadn't filled this yet, and we just had our lines mapped out, and they're all still on layers, and we want to condense them all down into one video layer. First thing we do is to turn off the background so we can just see the lines in our group here, and then we can go to our actions and we'll say new action, and we'll say copy to video layer. Make it F6. Okay, so it's recording already. We say first step is Control A to select everything. Control Shift C. So that's going to copy everything from every layer in your scene that's visible. And then we'll press Control Shift V to paste it. And that's going to paste it onto the layer that we're on. And now this is optional, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to put it in here. We'll go to the next frame. You unfortunately can't use the hotkeys for this, left and right buttons. For some reason that doesn't work. So you actually need to click this button here to say next frame. And then you press stop. Alright, so we've got to do this for a lot of frames now. But if I just press F6, it's going to keep doing it for everything. And I can just continuously press F6 and it's going to go through. And the other thing I can do is, I'm going to delete this old one. This one out. I'm going to delete this old one because this is from my original one. Just to make sure we're... Okay. So now it should be drawing from the right one. The other thing we can do now is, I'm going to duplicate this one. I drag it onto this. And then I'm going to select everything in there and duplicate it a bunch of times. And this means that you can just batch do things for lots and lots of frames. Usually I do like 10 at a time. Okay. And now, if I press play, it's going to go through all of these steps over and over and over and over again, which is really cool. That might not seem totally practical for you right now, but hopefully it demonstrates the way to work with time within your actions, and also that you can make variations of the same action quite quickly. Another variation that I use would be expand fill. Sometimes you don't want to have to step back a layer like you do in this one. So you can either say untick that one, or you can just duplicate it, and I'll make it F3, but I'll make it Control F3, and that means, so I'll delete these two, the step back and step forward layer. So all it does now is expands it, fills it, and deselects it. So if I select this and I press Control F3, it's going to expand fill without needing to go to different layers. Which, yeah, can be really good if you want to keep some of your fills on the same as your line layer. And I use that for illustration and production art stuff all the time as well. It's not necessarily an animation specific tool. It's just a nice way to bucket fill your drawings quickly. I'm going to wrap up now because this tutorial is really long and it's a little bit meandering. I know, and I'm sorry about that. But that's kind of a good analogy for animating in Photoshop anyway. You know, it's kind of the long way around to do things, but hopefully it opens the door for some people that wouldn't usually try animation as well. Yeah, so thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll try to keep updated with more stuff as it comes to mind, and comment below in the Vimeo link, and help out. I'll try to help you out, and people can help you out as well if they've got answers for questions you might have. Okay, thanks so much for watching, guys.